The plains had a strange way of carrying whispers farther than any rider could. That evening, when the wind moved through the tall grass like a quiet warning, every settler in the valley felt the tension settle in the air. Word had spread that peace between the settlement and the Apache band would only hold if one settler girl agreed to marry one of their warriors. Folks argued about it all day, their voices rising and falling like the creaking boards of the old meeting hall. By sundown, the choice had already been made. What shocked everyone was that the girl chosen had not been asked if she wanted any part of this arrangement at all. She stood in the doorway of her family's cabin, clutching the rough wood frame as if it could stop the future from rolling over her. She had grown up on these lands, helping her father with horses, hauling water, learning the rhythm of frontier life. She had dreamed of a simple path, maybe running her own small ranch someday, or helping her mother build a business selling stitched blankets. Never once had she imagined being forced into a treaty marriage with an Apache warrior she had never spoken to. The thought made her chest tighten, yet she kept her face steady because showing fear was the last thing she wanted. The elders said this marriage would bring peace. They said the warrior chosen was known for his fairness, his strength, and his loyalty to his people. They said he had offered himself as a sign that both sides wanted to end the cycle of raids, mistrust, and bloodshed. But none of those words eased the unease twisting inside her. She had heard stories about Apache warriors from travelers who passed through, stories filled with half-truth and fear. She wondered which version she would meet. Would he be harsh? Would he see her as nothing more than part of a deal? Would he resent her for being forced into this union just as she did? When she stepped outside into the cooling air, she saw the settlement gathered around the fire pit. The sky was turning orange and purple, and the mountains looked darker than usual, as if the land was holding its breath. Her father stood beside her, his jaw tight. He placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to hide his own worry. He knew his daughter had a quiet strength, but even that strength was being tested tonight. Her mother hovered close, brushing dust off her daughter's sleeves, even though the dress was already clean. It was the kind of nervous gesture a mother makes when her heart is aching but she refuses to break. The Apache riders appeared at the edge of the settlement just as the light faded. They moved with the calm confidence of men who belonged to the land more deeply than any wooden fence or dirt road. The warrior chosen to marry her rode at the front. His horse was tall, carrying him with the ease of someone who had lived more years riding than walking. His long black hair lay loose over his shoulders, and small pieces of tribal jewelry glinted softly near his neck. His expression was unreadable, but there was something steady in the way he looked at the crowd, as if he understood the weight of the moment. She tried to stand taller, refusing to shrink away from him. Though her heart pounded, she faced him directly. He dismounted without rushing and approached her with slow steps. He stopped a respectful distance away, not reaching for her or assuming any right. That small gesture surprised her more than she expected. It softened some of the fear, though not enough to steady her breath. Everyone watched in silence, waiting for the first words spoken between them. The warrior looked at her, studying her face, not with ownership but with curiosity. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and low. He said he understood she had not asked for this. He said he would not harm her. He said peace between their peoples meant more than forcing anyone into misery. His words, simple and steady, were more gentle than she imagined they would be. Still, the idea of leaving her home and stepping into a world she knew almost nothing about filled her with a new kind of fear. She glanced back at her parents. Her mother wiped her eyes with the corner of her shawl. Her father nodded at her, offering silent encouragement. He trusted the decision because he believed it could stop more fighting. But a father's belief did not erase the pain of watching his daughter walk toward a life she had not chosen. As the moment stretched, she wondered what her future would look like. Would she live in a camp far from everything familiar? Would she be accepted? Would she be treated as an outsider forever? And what of this warrior? He seemed controlled, thoughtful even, but she did not know his heart. She did not know if he felt trapped too, or if he saw this arrangement as duty alone. The settlement murmured as the evening deepened. Someone brought out a lantern, its light flickering across the faces of anxious families. Some settlers avoided looking at the warriors, still holding on to old fears. Others stared at her with quiet sympathy. A few whispered that she was brave. Though she did not feel brave at all, the warrior stepped to the side and extended his hand toward her, not demanding, only offering. It was a gesture that marked the beginning of the treaty. She stared at his hand, aware that taking it would change everything. Her heart beat so strongly she felt it in her fingertips. Her breath trembled. She thought of the wide plains, the sound of horses at dawn, the way quiet nights used to feel peaceful. She wondered if she would ever experience that kind of peace again, before she could decide. A sharp cry echoed from the far end of the settlement. Horses stomped nervously. People turned their heads. A young boy came running from the barn, shouting that riders had been spotted on the ridge. Not Apache, not settlers, but another band known for taking advantage of tension between tribes and towns. The kind that thrived in chaos. The kind that could ruin everything before peace even had a chance to settle. The warrior's posture shifted instantly, alert and ready. His eyes scanned the ridge, then the settlement, then her. His calm expression hardened into focus. The settlers grabbed rifles, forming lines around the families. Her father pulled her close for a moment, his voice tight as he told her not to move. Lantern light shook in the wind, making shadows jump across the ground. The warrior stepped closer to her, not touching her but positioning himself as if ready to shield her if danger broke loose. The sight startled her. For a moment she forgot her fear of the marriage and felt a different kind of worry rise inside her, one she had not expected. The idea of harm reaching him or her settlement made her chest feel heavy. The boy pointed toward the ridge again. The riders were coming down fast. Dust rose behind them, and the sound of hooves rushed toward the settlement. People braced themselves. A few whispered prayers. The warrior watched them approach, his jaw tightening, then he looked at her again. His voice was low but urgent now. He told her to stay behind him. He told her the peace both sides wanted might be tested sooner than anyone imagined. She felt the tension coil through her body as the ridge, filled with moving shapes, horses, unknown riders, trouble. She stood frozen, torn between fear, uncertainty, and the strange comfort of standing beside someone she barely knew but who had already shown more steadiness than most men she had met. The wind pushed through the grass, carrying the sound of the approaching riders as they closed the distance. Everyone held their breath as the first silhouette broke clear of the dust. The moment she saw it, she knew nothing about her life would remain the same, and the rider lifting his weapon toward the settlement made her heart stop in her chest. The rider who appeared from the dust carried the kind of presence that sent a chill through the entire settlement. He was part of a roaming band known for stirring trouble between groups, striking at weak moments and slipping away before anyone could hold them accountable. The moment she saw the weapon lifted high, her breath caught in her throat. The Apache warrior beside her shifted into a defensive stance, grounding himself like a man who had lived through enough danger to know when trouble was coming fast. People scrambled behind wagons and fences. Her father stood ahead of her, gripping his old rifle with hands that trembled more from worry for her than fear of the riders. The warrior kept his focus locked on the ridge, his posture steady, as though the ground beneath him could tilt and he would not move an inch. She felt her heart race and tried to calm herself, but her mind spun with questions. Why were these riders coming now? Were they here to break the peace? Did they know about the treaty marriage? Or were they simply looking for trouble? The riders slowed as they neared the settlement, spreading out enough to make their intentions unclear. Their leader lowered his weapon but did not holster it. That alone created an uneasy silence across the camp. The warrior stepped slightly in front of her, not touching her, simply creating a barrier between her and the newcomers. The gesture surprised her more than she expected. He owed her nothing, yet he moved to protect her without a second thought. The lead rider called out a greeting that carried more challenge than friendliness. He demanded to know why Apache warriors were standing inside a settler camp without conflict. He said he had heard strange stories about a treaty, about a marriage, about peace that sounded too fragile to be real. His tone made it clear he was not here to support peace. He thrived in chaos, and peace robbed men like him of the chaos they fed on. Her father answered him first, stating firmly that this was none of his concern. But the writer laughed, glancing between the settlers and the Apache men. He said peace without strength meant weakness, and that weakness was an invitation for ruin. His words made several settlers grip their weapons tighter. Fear spread across the crowd, but so did confusion. The last thing anyone wanted was a fight when peace was so close. The Apache warrior raised his voice calmly, telling the newcomers that this moment was sacred, that an agreement had been reached for the sake of both sides. The leader's eyes narrowed. He studied the warrior with a lingering smirk, as though sizing up his resolve. Then his gaze drifted to her. She felt her stomach twist under the weight of his stare. He asked if she was the girl chosen for the treaty marriage. The question made her tense. She wanted to step back, but she refused to show fear. Her mother clutched her shawl near her throat. The tension in the air thickened when the lead rider leaned forward on his saddle and spoke again. He said peace bought with marriage sounded more like surrender than strength. His voice carried over the settlement like a spark threatening to ignite something dangerous. People looked between her and the warrior. Unsure what the rider was planning, the warrior stepped forward, his voice low and controlled, warning the man to leave before trouble began. The lead rider laughed again, but this time the sound held a sharper edge. He said he would return soon, and when he did, he wanted to see if the peace still held or if fear had already broken it. With that, he signaled his men and rode off toward the ridge, leaving dust hanging in the air and tension rooted deep in every heart. When the last of their silhouettes vanished behind the hills, people exhaled softly, almost afraid to break the stillness. She felt her knees weaken for a moment, not from fear alone but from the heavy realization that peace was fragile. It could be shattered by a single spark, and those riders had arrived ready to strike flint. The Apache warrior looked at her, his expression no longer unreadable but filled with a seriousness that told her he understood how dangerous this moment had been. Her father approached them, asking if she was all right. She nodded, though her voice failed her. Her mother brushed her hand gently across her daughter's cheek, whispering that everything would settle with time. But deep inside, the girl knew something had shifted. The world she thought she understood had widened, and she stood at the edge of it, unsure what awaited her. The settlement leaders gathered quickly to discuss what had happened. They spoke about the newcomer band, about old grudges, about trouble brewing in the hills. They talked in low voices, arguing over whether the treaty marriage should continue now that outsiders wanted to interfere. Some feared moving forward would provoke those riders. Others said stopping the treaty would cause deeper harm. Voices rose and fell, swirling with worry. She listened quietly, trying to understand the weight of her place in all this. She was not a warrior. She had never been asked to carry the burden of an entire treaty. Yet here she stood, knowing the choice made for her could determine the future of two worlds. She felt the pressure settle around her like a heavy blanket, but she also felt something else. A strange pull toward understanding the people she was being joined to. The Apache warrior remained near her family, standing with a calm patience as though he felt responsible for their safety now. He didn't speak unless spoken to, but he watched the land, the sky, the direction the riders had taken. Every movement he made carried purpose. She noticed how he seemed to read danger before others even sensed it. It made her wonder what kind of life he had lived. How many battles had shaped him? What stories rested behind his steady gaze? As night deepened, lanterns flickered along the dirt paths between cabins. People returned to their homes, still shaken but trying to regain some sense of normalcy. Her family invited the warrior to remain near their cabin until morning, when the rest of the Apache band would return. He accepted without hesitation, as though he understood the importance of staying close. She sat on the cabin steps, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching the warrior as he kept quiet watch over the settlement. The firelight near him made the metal on his tribal jewelry glint softly. In the distance, coyotes called out, but he did not flinch. He stood like part of the land, as if night was something he had known more intimately than most people ever would. She spoke to him softly, not sure how much he would share. She asked why he had volunteered for the treaty marriage. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. He said he wanted peace more than most understood. He spoke of young men lost in raids, of endless retaliation, of nights when neither side slept because fear held both hearts hostage. He said someone had to take the first step toward breaking the cycle, even if that step cost him a piece of his life. His honesty surprised her. She had expected duty or resignation, not sincerity. It stirred something in her that she could not name. She asked him if he was angry about being forced into this union. He shook his head slowly. He said the choice was not forced. He had offered himself. Those words echoed in her mind, unsettling and calming her at the same time. Her father stepped outside and joined them, wanting to hear the warriors' thoughts. They spoke quietly about the trouble riders, about the growing danger in the region. The warrior warned that the band might return, possibly bringing more men. He said they would use fear and confusion to undermine the treaty. Her father listened closely, recognizing the truth in his voice. As the fire burned lower, she found herself studying the warrior more closely. He seemed fearless, yet not careless. Strong, yet not harsh. His presence created a sense of protection she had not expected to feel so soon. It confused her, stirring emotions she had not prepared for. The night grew colder, and her father finally urged everyone to rest. The warrior remained on watch, refusing shelter. She hesitated before going inside, glancing back at him. He gave her a small nod, not a command, just a quiet reassurance that he would keep watch. Inside the cabin, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She replayed everything that had happened. The arrival of the riders, the tension, the warrior's protection, the truth in his voice. She felt pulled between fear of the unknown and a strange curiosity about the man who would soon become her husband. Outside, the wind shifted again. Hooves rustled in the distance, faint but real. The warrior straightened suddenly, eyes fixed on the dark ridge. Something was coming. And this time, it was moving faster than before. The faint sound of hooves drifted across the dark ridge like an echo from a distant warning. The Apache warrior stood motionless, listening with the focus of a man who trusted his instincts more than any lantern or rifle. The night air carried a strange stillness, the kind that came right before trouble unfolded. Inside the cabin, she pushed aside her blanket and sat up, sensing something had shifted again. She had never been able to read danger the way he did, but the silence outside felt heavy in a way she could not ignore. When her father stepped out to check the horses, he paused on the porch with the warrior. Their silhouettes were outlined by the dim lantern light. Her father asked if it was the same riders from earlier. The warrior shook his head slowly, saying this sounded different. She felt a small tremor of fear rise inside her. If this was not the trouble band, then who else would be riding near the settlement at this hour? No group, settler or Apache, traveled at night without reason. She stepped outside quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The warrior glanced at her briefly, not in surprise but with the awareness of someone who had already expected she would want to know. He pointed toward the far ridge where a faint line of movement flickered in the moonlight. Shadows, too many to count quickly. Her heart tightened. Whatever this was, it was not a small patrol. Her father whispered that they needed to wake the settlement leaders. The warrior agreed. Before anyone could move, a sharp horn sounded from the edge of the town. One of the night guards had spotted the riders and warned the rest. Dogs began barking, doors opened, and tired settlers stepped out in confusion, clutching rifles or lanterns. Fear spread quickly, but so did a stubborn determination. People here had faced storms, sickness, and raids before. Still, no one liked the idea of facing another danger just hours after trying to secure peace. As the settlement stirred, she noticed something in the warrior's expression she hadn't seen before. Not fear, not anger. Something more complicated, like recognition. She stepped closer and asked softly if he knew who the riders were. He hesitated, then admitted he had a feeling they were connected to a conflict happening deeper in the Apache territory. Not enemies, but not entirely friendly either. A rival band that disagreed with the idea of peace between settlers and his people. Hearing that made the unease in her stomach grow heavier. Peace had always sounded fragile, but now it felt like it was balanced on a thin branch that could snap with one wrong move. The leaders gathered near the fire pit, their voices rising as they asked the warrior for answers. He explained that not every Apache group supported the treaty marriage. Some saw the settlers as intruders. Others believed peace would weaken their position. The band approaching might be here to challenge the agreement or worse, try to take control of the situation. The leaders exchanged troubled glances. They had expected resistance, but not this quickly and not with the threat of another armed group descending on their homes. Her father asked if this rival band would attack the settlement. The warrior shook his head with uncertainty. He said they might try to take him back to their camp by force, which would end the treaty before it even began. Or they might try to pressure the settlers to cancel the marriage. Or they might want something far more dangerous, something neither side was prepared for. The unpredictability of their motives made the air thicken with worry. The riders finally came into clearer view. They approached slowly, spreading out across the open ground with deliberate steps. This time no weapons were raised, but the tension still grew. Their leader rode at the front, a tall man with firm posture and eyes that scanned every corner of the settlement. When he stopped, he nodded at the warrior, acknowledging him but not greeting him. Then he looked at the settlers with a mix of suspicion and challenge. The leader announced that he wanted to speak privately with the warrior. The settlers hesitated, unsure if they should allow it. The warrior stepped forward, promising he would not be taken without a fight. Her heart thumped at the thought. She didn't want him dragged away by men who opposed peace, yet she also knew she had no place to intervene. The leader dismounted, and the two men walked a short distance away. Speaking in low voices and a mix of their native language and English, she watched them from the fire pit, trying to read their expressions. The warrior stood firm, but the rival leader's voice rose enough at times to reveal frustration. She saw the leader gesture toward the settlement, toward her, toward the warrior's horse. Each movement sharpened the suspense gripping her chest. It was clear the man did not approve of the treaty, and even clearer he blamed the warrior for supporting it. The conversation lasted longer than anyone expected. Some settlers paced nervously, others hid behind wagons, watching with wide eyes. Her mother stayed beside her, clutching her arm tightly. She whispered a quiet hope that the men would reach some kind of agreement. But she did not sound convinced. When the men finally returned to the group, the rival leader looked angry, but controlled. He announced to everyone that he and his band would not interfere tonight, but he expected the warrior to reconsider the treaty. He warned that peace created with pressure would collapse under the first sign of conflict. He said the warrior had a duty to protect their people, not bind them to strangers. His words stung, even though she understood he spoke from loyalty to his own. Before leaving, the leader spoke directly to her. His voice softened only slightly. He said being bound to a man from a different world would test her strength in ways she could not predict. He said she would be judged not only by her own people but by his. She swallowed hard, meeting his gaze with as much calm as she could manage. She refused to look away, even though her heart pounded fiercely. After the rival band rode off, the settlement let out a long, uneasy breath. The night guard returned to their posts, though their hands trembled slightly around their lanterns. Some families gathered their children inside, whispering nervously about what might come next. This time the danger had passed without bloodshed, but the uneasiness stayed behind like a shadow. Clinging to every cabin wall, her father invited the warrior inside to warm himself by the fire. Yet the warrior declined, choosing again to stand watch outside. She stepped out after a moment, wrapping her shawl tight. She didn't want him standing alone in the cold, though she wasn't sure what she would even say. He looked at her and offered a quiet reassurance. He said this conflict was not about her personally. It was about fear, about how both sides had been hurt before, about how difficult it was for people to trust again. She nodded, though part of her still felt the weight of it all pressing against her chest. She told him she never asked for any of this. He said he knew. That simple response brought a strange calm to her, not because it solved anything, But because it made her feel seen, they talked softly for a while, sharing more about their pasts. She told him about growing up in the settlement, about the harsh winters, about losing livestock during storms. He told her about traveling with his people through the mountains, about long hunts, about challenges faced during drought seasons. The more they spoke, the more she realized he carried burdens she had never imagined. He knew loss, struggles, loyalty, responsibility. And now he carried the weight of a peace agreement that could collapse at any moment the next subplot unfolded. The following morning, when a group of settlers approached her family with concern, they questioned whether the treaty was still a good idea after the tensions seen. Some argued that the rival Apache band could cause more trouble. Others feared that the marriage itself placed her in danger, believing she would be caught between cultures and expectations. These conversations stirred conflict within the settlement, causing neighbors to argue among themselves. Her mother defended the treaty, reminding them that peace required effort and courage. Yet others disagreed loudly, creating cracks in the once close-knit community. Another angle of conflict emerged from the Apache side as smaller groups arrived to observe the settlement and gauge whether the marriage would proceed. Some looked curious, others wary. A few approached the warrior to express doubts. She overheard parts of their discussions, picking up bits of their concerns. Trust was fragile, and the marriage placed the warrior at the center of a storm swirling between people who were tired of fighting but unsure how to stop. Meanwhile, the trouble riders from the previous day had not disappeared entirely. Scouts reported seeing them circling the valley, watching from a distance. Their presence kept everyone on edge. The settlers worried they would attack to exploit the tension. The Apache feared the trouble band would try to sabotage peace or kidnap someone to provoke retaliation. Every passing hour felt heavier than the one before. As she watched the warrior prepare his weapons and speak to the Apache scouts, she realized how deeply he was tied to this conflict. She saw the pressure in his shoulders, the determination in his eyes, the fear he tried to hide for the sake of others. She also saw how people looked to him now, settlers and Apache alike. His choices would shape what came next, for better or worse, and somewhere deep inside, she felt her own life becoming entangled in the conflict more tightly than she had ever imagined. That night, as campfires burned low and the settlement drifted into uneasy sleep, the wind shifted again. The trouble riders had returned, and this time, their shadows stretched across the valley as if they had come for more than just warnings. The trouble riders returned like a dark wave rolling over the valley, their silhouettes cutting against the faint glow of the moon. This time they did not linger at the ridge or send scouts to observe from afar. They rode with purpose, forming a wide crescent around the settlement as if to test how close they could get before anyone dared to challenge them. Their presence pulsed through the air, creating a fear that settled in every breath people took. The Apache warrior stood near the fire pit, watching the shadows draw closer. His expression held a calm that came from years of surviving danger. Yet beneath it she could sense a tension that felt different from before. This was not the measured caution he had shown earlier. This was the sharp awareness of a man preparing for something far larger than a simple warning. She stood a few steps behind him, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The night wind tugged at the fringe, but she hardly noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the riders gathering in the valley like storm clouds. Her father and the settlement leaders hurried to organize guards. Lanterns were lifted, rifles checked, and horses secured behind fences. Mothers pulled children inside, and barred windows, whispering prayers under their breath. Even the bravest men paced with nervous energy, casting glances toward the warrior as if hoping his steady presence alone might shield them. When the riders finally stopped at the edge of the main road, their leader dismounted. He walked forward, alone as he had done before, but the confidence in his stride had hardened into something sharper. He called out to the warrior with a voice that carried across the settlement, demanding answers about the treaty marriage and the peace it promised. He hinted that the people in the hills wanted the agreement broken. He said war was easier to understand than peace, and that the marriage threatened to change long-standing ways that some men did not want changed. The warrior stepped forward, refusing to let fear guide his words. He said the treaty was still standing. He said the marriage would go forward. He said peace mattered more than pride. The rider's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening with frustration. He turned toward the settlers, pointing at the cabins that lined the open ground. He accused them of weakness, of hiding behind agreements they did not truly believe in. The settlers bristled but held their ground, unwilling to provoke a fight yet aware of the danger standing at their doorstep. She watched as both sides hovered at the edge of breaking. The air felt stretched, thin, ready to snap. And then something shifted from the far end of the valley. More movement stirred in the darkness. This time the shadows did not belong to trouble riders. These figures carried themselves differently. The warrior recognized them first. He stiffened, his eyes narrowing in concern. When the figures emerged into the dim moonlight, she saw they were members of the rival Apache band that visited earlier. The men who had warned the warrior to turn away from the treaty. The men who did not trust the settlers or the peace being formed. The trouble riders noticed them too, and their leader cursed under his breath. Whoever these newcomers were, they were not allies. Some stood against peace, others sought chaos, and now both had arrived at the same moment. Two threats circling the same fragile ground. The rival Apache band did not approach quickly. They moved with deliberate care, as though they were trying to understand what was unfolding. Their leader dismounted and stood near the trouble rider, facing both the settlers and the warrior. His presence built another layer of tension. He had warned the warrior once. Now he had returned to see if his warning had been ignored. The settlement fell into a heavy silence. The warrior stood between the two groups, shoulders squared, ready to defend more than just himself. She saw the strain in his stance, the weight of knowing his people were divided and the settlers were depending on him. She felt her heart clench with worry. She wanted to reach out to him, but she knew this moment belonged to him, and the land that shaped him. The rival leader confronted the trouble riders first. He accused them of stirring conflict that did not belong to them. He said they had no right to push any group toward war. The trouble rider laughed bitterly, saying no group had a right to make weak promises of peace either. He turned to the warrior, challenging him to admit that peace required sacrifices neither side was ready for. The warrior answered firmly. He said both sides had already sacrificed more than enough through loss and fighting. He said peace was the only path forward, even if it was difficult. His voice carried strength, but she could see how much effort it took for him. To stand firm while surrounded by men who doubted him, the rival leader stepped closer, studying the warrior with an intensity that made her breath catch. He asked if the warrior truly believed the settlers would honor their side of the treaty. The warrior nodded. The leader asked if he trusted the girl chosen for the marriage. The warrior hesitated, then answered yes. That single word sent heat rushing through her. Not because it promised anything personal, but because it showed he had placed faith not only in peace, but in her. The trouble rider scoffed, calling the warrior foolish. He said trust was a weapon that could cut deeper than any blade. The rival leader glared at him, warning him to stay out of Apache matters. The trouble rider insisted that he spoke for men like him, men who believed peace would weaken their chance of controlling the valley. The rival warrior shot back that the valley belonged to no one. Their voices grew sharper, angrier, spiraling like sparks searching for dry wood. The settlers watched with rising fear. Some whispered that a fight could break out at any moment. Her father kept her behind him, though she refused to step back. The warrior stood as the only barrier between two sides ready to collide. The weight of the valley, the treaty, and the marriage hung on his shoulders. Suddenly, one of the trouble riders shifted his horse and reached toward his weapon. The movement was small, but it ignited panic. Settlers raised rifles. Apache men tensed. The rival band stepped forward. The trouble riders spread out. Horses stamped the ground nervously. She felt her breath leave her chest as the first moment of true violence seemed seconds away. Then a sharp cry echoed from the ridge. More riders were approaching. This time, it was the remaining members of the warrior's own band, reinforcements, but instead of easing the tension, their arrival tightened it. 3 groups now stood in the valley, each with their own beliefs, fears, and loyalties. One spark could destroy everything. The warrior raised his hand to stop his men from charging forward. The rival leader did the same, but the trouble riders were losing patience. Their leader shouted that he would not wait for peace to make fools of them. He warned that he would not allow the warrior or the settlers to change the fate of the valley. He signaled his men to prepare. The rival band moved closer. Blocking their path, the warrior stepped between them all, shouting for everyone to stop, and for a moment, the valley froze. Her heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. She could almost hear the land itself holding its breath. The warrior looked at her briefly, a flicker of worry in his eyes. She realized he feared not only for the treaty and the valley, but for her safety most of all. The trouble rider's fingers tightened on his weapon. The rival band leaned forward. Ready, the warrior braced himself, and just when it seemed the night would erupt into chaos, a sudden flare of fire shot up from behind the trouble riders. Someone had set a brush pile ablaze near the lower slope, sending flames leaping into the sky. The horses spooked, pulling back. The trouble riders fell into confusion, shouting to regain control. The rival band shifted. Ready to take advantage of the distraction, the warrior saw the danger before anyone else. He turned sharply toward her, shouting for her to run to safety. The ground shook with pounding hooves. Flames rose higher, weapons lifted. Fear and fire collided in the valley as everything spiraled toward a breaking point as she realized the climax of this conflict would force every truth, every choice, every sacrifice into the open. The moment the fire flared behind the trouble riders, everything seemed to scatter at once. Horses reared and shrieked, men yelled orders over one another, and the valley filled with shadows running in every direction. She rushed backward as the Apache warrior sprinted toward her, reaching her before the chaos swallowed her completely. He grabbed her arm just long enough to steady her, then guided her behind a wagon where she would be safe from the rushing horses. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it echo in her chest, but she did not let go of his hand until he had her hidden from danger. Across the valley, the trouble riders scrambled to control their animals.